Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. How are you doing? I do hope you're doing remarkably well. I'm doing great, thank you very much, and I'm so delighted you've joined me for part 2 of our story tonight. But before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up, and by all means share these stories with anyone who enjoys a good story. So let's continue with part 2 of our story tonight. So what happened? Asked Freya, turning to the young woman. Did you see the person that snatched your purse? Not really. I was about to call a taxi, but I was bending down to look at a dead bird in the road. I think someone ran the poor thing over. I was bending over to look at it closely to see if it really was dead. I felt this hard tug from behind me. I looked up and this young man dashed away with my purse in his hand. I saw a flash of his white sweatshirt, and then that was it. I called after him, stop, and tried to give him chase, but he ran like a cheetah, and after a couple of drinks, I felt a little wobbly on my feet, so I gave up on the chase. I'm so sorry. I really am. It's awful when something like that happens. It's no biggie, said Tina. I've had worse things happen in my life, believe me. A bag being snatched from me is pie in the sky. Don't worry, said Freya sympathetically. Let me tell you, my life is on a downward trajectory at the moment. Everything's gone awry. So join the club of the disenfranchised. My boyfriend ditched me for a newer model. I was made redundant. I'm now living with my punctilious sister and her overbearing husband, who's made it very clear that I'm not welcome in their home. But without their charity, I'd be homeless. So you have to be grateful for any scraps you can get, don't you? I'm so sorry. That really sucks, said Tina, pulling a face. It never rains, does it? It always pours. I find when bad things happen, they all seem to happen at once. That reminds me, Freya, I need to take down your details, said Tina. Have you got a pen and paper that I can use? Sure, said Freya, rustling around in her purse, to pull out an old envelope and a pen, which she handed to Tina. Yeah, you can use this if you like. The girl was scribbling away on the back of the envelope. You're Freya Frost, isn't that right? What is your address? She asked. The address of your sister, that is. If this is about paying me back for the taxi, said Freya, there's absolutely no need. In fact, if the truth be told, I'd like you not to pay me back. I know it sounds crazy, but right now my sister is helping me out of all the messes I'm currently embroiled in. It feels good to help someone else, so that I don't feel like a complete loser, if that makes any sense. You've helped me get an ounce of my self-respect back. I'm only giving you my details if you fancy getting together for a drink one night. It would be fun. I think you and I might be able to nurse each other's wounds in a manner of speaking. My sister is about as sympathetic to my current plight as a cobra is towards the rat it's ingesting. Tina laughed. That's terrible. You and I are like birds of a feather, aren't we? The young woman looked at Freya affectionately. You shouldn't demean yourself like this. You're a lovely person, Freya. So what if your life's a little topsy-turvy? For the record, mine's a haystack, in which the needle that's holding it together can never be found. In other words, I'm an unfixable mess. You, on the other hand, you can easily be fixed. My bet is your problems could be over in a second. Mine, on the other hand, I'll likely carry with me to the grave. Some problems you cannot shake off. Sorry to sound so melodramatic. Don't apologise, Tina, for that. You're entitled to feel flustered after being robbed. I would too if I was in your shoes. Oh, and thanks, by the way, for the compliment. But I assure you I am far from lovely, said Freya. I can assure you my sister and her husband would testify to that without any problems. Well, I wouldn't be interested in what they had to say, said Tina. I'm quite capable of making up my own mind about people. And I say you're lovely, so no arguing over this matter. Freya said nothing, for she noticed that Tina looked rather melancholic, as if her mind was over 1,000 miles away. And suddenly Freya was most sure that she was not the most troubled soul in Atlanta. It would seem there were others considerably worse off than she was emotionally. This was not something that had actually occurred to her before. Although, to be fair, Tina Crosscrow was not forthcoming about herself. She seemed rather elusive and somewhat evasive, and probably buttoned up her emotions, squirreling them away like a squirrel clandestinely stashing its acorns for the winter. Freya could tell that Tina Crosscrow was indeed a lost soul, if she'd ever seen one before. How she knew this, she didn't exactly know, but she felt it tangibly. "Here," she said to her kindly, "have my windbreaker. You look freezing in that dress. We're not in summer yet, you know. And although I will admit you have a figure to die for that deserves to be shown off, this is not the time to do it, unless you want to end up like that poor bird on the side of the road, frozen to death." Tina looked at the bird wistfully. "At least it's at peace now, isn't it? All its troubles long behind it. It never has to worry again, does it? I envy that bird. I really do." Freya peered at Tina curiously. "Your life can't be that bad, can it?" she asked her. Tina gave her a watery smile. "It depends on what you mean by bad," she said. Before Freya was able to question Tina any further, the taxi arrived, and the two girls clambered awkwardly into the back of the car. The garrulous taxi driver talked chirpily as he took them to their respective locations. When the taxi arrived at Tina's address, where she claimed to be staying with an old friend of hers, she did something that rather surprised Freya. She grabbed Freya by both hands, giving them a tight squeeze. She then impulsively kissed Freya tenderly on the sides of both of her cheeks, and then whispered into her ear, "Please keep it, if you can bear to." What the hell did she mean by that? Freya wondered. She was so drunk tonight that nothing made sense to her at all. But little did she know, this random meeting or chance encounter with Tina Crosscrow would change her life, and she'd never ever see Tina Crosscrow again. 2 months later, Freya woke up in her bed to hear an argument going on in the living room downstairs. She had never ever heard her sister having an argument before with her husband. Freya's ears were flapping. Could it be the seemingly perfect relationship her sister claimed to have with her husband Thornton was beginning to show a few cracks after all? If there were a few loose floorboards in the foundations of their relationship, or a leak in the seemingly incorruptible roof, it would make Freya feel significantly better about herself and her abysmal record with men to date. She had always ended up drawing the short end of the straw when it came to relationships, and it had been the perennial beleaguered story of her life. She had grown used to being dumped or thrown to the wayside like an old piece of tobacco being spat out on the curb. Rainey had always told her that Freya picked the wrong men, which was the quintessential predominant reason her relationships fell apart. But with the current heated rampage going on downstairs, maybe Rainey had painted her husband in far too favourable a light. Love could be blind after all. Maybe things weren't quite so rosy in the garden with Rainey and her husband Thornton after all. "We never fight, Thornton and I," Rainey had told her once very proudly. "We just respect each other. That's what you need in a relationship, Freya. A man that will respect you." If the truth be told, Freya had never ever warmed to the supercilious Thornton. She had always found the toffee-nosed, lofty, imperious man incredibly condescending towards her, as if he thought she was made up of fluff and a whole lot of hot air. With an unquenchable intrigue, she silently tiptoed cautiously down the staircase, ensuring that her footsteps were clandestine on their approach. Fortunately, the cold stainless steel staircase, with about as much personality and charm as Thornton himself, did not creak, unlike the staircases of obvious character in more historic homes. Everything in her sister's minimalistic, no-nonsense house was robustly strong, aloof, and unfriendly. After she descended the rigidly stiff staircase, she crept up stealthily across the cream carpet to the living room door, which had been left slightly ajar. Her ears were burning. She stood very still for a moment, hearing her name mentioned in the conversation. She drew in a deep breath. She might have known that the argument centred around her unsolicited, scorned presence in their household. She was the catalyst that had blown a tempestuous storm into her sister's life, and ruffled Thornton's feathers considerably. And by the sounds of things he had become like a hot kettle on the hob, boiling over with infuriation. She realised she had long since outstayed her welcome, and this unsettling revelation fired her up with a guilty conscience. It was true. She'd been here for far too long. She was dependent on her sister, as without her she'd have to return home to Canada, cap in hand, begging her parents to dig her out of the unfortunate hole she found herself buried in. She couldn't bear the prospect of doing that. She did have some pride left after all. Her parents would be disappointed in her when they gleaned what a complete mess she'd made of her life, despite the fact that they'd invested so much financially in her education. Parents always naturally expected their children to do better than they did in life. Her father had said, "I want my kids to reach for the stars, to go places that I never could, which is why I believe in investing in my kids' education." The trouble is that unlike her sister Rainey, Freya had never been that bright at school. Her abysmal grades had been very disappointing. But she had shown promise in the arts and anything creative. Freya knew everything she touched seemed to go awry. Thornton's voice boomed in the living room so loudly that the wine glasses in the bar area began to rattle precariously. "But when is she bloody going, Rainey?" came Thornton's outraged voice. "She's been here for 2 months. There are no signs of her leaving at all. I've had enough of her squatting in our home, taking advantage of our hospitality. You know I have never been comfortable with her living here with us. And by the looks of things, she's getting far too comfortable living under our roof. And whenever I ask her when she intends to leave, she's very conveniently vague about it, mumbles under her breath something about needing to find a job. I've had enough of her, Rainey. For so long I've put up with her for your sake, not mine. But I have to draw a line in the sand. I've had enough, and I want her out." "But she's been trying her damnedest to get a job, Thornton. You're being so unreasonable. I mean, she really has been trying. She's gone to lots and lots of interviews, but no one is hiring at the moment. Once she gets her feet onto solid ground, she'll be out of here, I promise you. I'm sure she'll find something soon enough. The kind of job she's looking for is rather specialised." "Specialised? Are you kidding me?" said Thornton contemptuously. "What are you smoking, Rainey? Your sister spends her life selling people knickers. You hear me, woman? Knickers. There's nothing specialised about doing that. What's wrong with you, Rainey? Have you gone all soft all of a sudden? I thought you didn't like her being here any more than I do." "But she's my sister, Thornton. What am I supposed to do? Throw her out onto the streets? How could I live with myself if I did that? You're an only child. You don't understand. But I have a duty of responsibility to my sister. And besides, if I do send her home to Canada, I don't know what it will do to Mum and Dad. My parents, they're not going to take it very well." "Rainey, I don't give a damn. You hear me? I don't give a damn. Can you see what she's doing? She's worming her way into our lives. I want her out. I've never had much time for her. When she cooked a meal for us the other day, the mess was terrible. I was in the kitchen all night clearing up after her. I'm sorry, but if you don't tell her to go, I will." "Thornton, just give her another month, please. If she doesn't find a job, I'll send her to Canada myself, I promise you, to be with Mum and Dad." Freya did not want to listen to anything more. She'd heard enough. The idea of being sent back to her childhood home in Montreal was far from easy to digest. She couldn't bear to see the bitter disappointment in her parents' faces when they realised she had failed to support herself financially. It would grieve their hearts exponentially, given that they had invested so much in their children's education over the years and made monumental sacrifices. She knew they would blame themselves for not being better parents in some way. She knew her father would be digging in his pockets, trying to help her out as best he could. He'd be eager to pay for her to do a course or something to get back on her feet. But they needed their money now that they were retired, and she didn't want to take advantage of their kindness. But by the looks of things, if things didn't change very soon, she'd be given a one-way ticket to Montreal, and her worst fears would be realized. Rainey did not want this to happen either, for her any more than she did. She knew that her brother-in-law did not like her hanging around his house like a bad smell, and he had made no secret that he found her presence in their home an annoying intrusion. But she didn't enjoy sponging on their hospitality either. Thornton had always looked down on her after the first time he'd asked her what she did for a living, as if her job in some way reflected who she was as a person. And in his opinion, selling stuff was not something that required engaging your brain cells. Did he have any idea how wrong he was about that? Everyone knew that everything in life revolved around sales, and people needed guidance when buying stuff, from car tires to the products a dentist buys for his surgery. You need to buy these things from someone who knows what they're talking about, or you could end up in heaps of trouble. "So you're a shop girl, are you?" Thornton had said snootily, looking at her pitifully, as if she'd announced she was born with 3 legs and was in some way severely disabled. "That's right. I work in an underwear department, helping women with fittings. I help them select the right underwear for the best support. Some women with very big breasts get terrible back problems. It makes all the difference for them if they're wearing the right size bra to get decent support. That's where I come in. Some chiropractors actually refer their clients to me because some back problems are caused by very heavy breasts, so they need specialized support or otherwise breast reduction surgery to address the problem. I also help women with nursing bras for breastfeeding, stuff like that, so they can find an easy, more convenient way to feed their baby. Beyond that, so many women are wearing the wrong bra size. I know at once what size they are, just by looking at them, based on my years of training, and when they receive a fitting from me, they feel so much better about themselves. Imagine wearing glasses that kept sliding down your nose. It's a little like that. Most women don't know their size. They think they do, but they don't. I also help women who've lost their breast in a mastectomy. I help them with padding and stuff like that. Many of them lose their confidence, and I help make them feel better about themselves because when they wear the padded bra, they look normal again. You cannot tell that they've lost their breasts at all. I have had all the training, so I know my stuff. Many of the women I meet say I've changed their lives. Their back pain has gone, their confidence restored. And in my book, that's a pretty big deal, Thornton. So no, I wouldn't call myself a shop girl, as you so put it. I've had a specialized training. Even the Queen of England goes to a specialist for her undergarments, you know. Thornton snorted. Furthermore, he looked very bored, as he had listened to her harp on about underwear. He certainly did not take her seriously, and that was affirmed when he cluelessly said, "Call it what you want, Freya. But you're a glorified shop girl, the way I see it. Look at me. I don't need any help when I'm buying my boxers and briefs. I'm in and out of the shop faster than you can say Jack Robinson. Rainie's much the same, aren't you, dear? She doesn't need anyone helping her with her smalls. Without wishing to be rude, personally I thought my wife's sister would be doing something more useful and productive with her life, rather than helping people select their smalls. Your father invested big money into your education, and even sent you to college, and you're selling underwear for a living. It's a bloody joke. I'm sorry, but it is. Do your parents know what you do for a living?" "No, they don't, and I would appreciate, Thornton, if you didn't tell them, because they might think like you do. They're rather old-fashioned. It's a good job, though, we're not all academic like you, Thornton," Freya had retorted. "If we were, who would do the practical stuff in our lives? It makes sense that we all have different skills. Otherwise, our lives wouldn't work." "I think I could survive without someone helping me with my briefs," he had said dismissively. Freya wanted to slap him across his patronizing face so hard, but she just walked away, knowing that you couldn't reason with some people, and Thornton would never come off his arrogant pedestal, as he enjoyed living in his gilded cage, looking at the world through a very distorted pair of lenses. Freya slept in late the following morning, until she finally heard the front door slamming behind Rainey and her brother-in-law, and knew that they had left the property, to go to their sensible jobs at the university. She sighed with relief when she finally had the place to herself for the next few hours, without having to face Thornton glowering at her disapprovingly over the breakfast table, especially after she'd overheard him whinging and moaning about how much he wanted Freya to leave their home. She knew her time was running out here at her sister's house. It was growing increasingly apparent that Thornton could not wait to kick her out, so she needed to find a job fast, and she couldn't afford to be choosy. She'd have to pick any department store job, rather than her speciality job selling and fitting underwear on grateful customers. She also needed to find affordable accommodation, otherwise she'd be returning to her childhood home in Canada, to throw an unwanted grenade in her parents' lives, when she had to admit that she was jobless and couldn't afford a roof over her head. They were completely in the dark about her current state of affairs. Ostensibly, both her mother and dad had faced some health issues of late, and Rainey didn't think it would be wise to tell them about Freya's recent screw-ups. When Freya phoned them, she'd spin out tall stories about how great everything was. She was doing so well at work, as a medical secretary, which was of course a barefaced lie, and her relationship looked likely to end in marriage. "Oh, I'm so glad, sweetheart," her mother had said to her over the telephone. "I do so want to see you happily settled down like your sister Rainey, my love. It'll mean I can go to bed with a load off my mind, not having to worry about you at all, knowing that someone is taking care of you. And your boyfriend sounds absolutely wonderful. I can't wait for us to meet him when you finally tie the knot. Me and your father, we always worry about you. But knowing you have such a fabulous boyfriend and an amazing job brings me great peace of mind." Once the house had successfully regurgitated its unwanted residents and had slipped into a congenial silence, Freya clambered rather awkwardly down the staircase. She badly needed a cup of coffee, even if it was decaffeinated, in order to get her day started. Her cell phone began to ring obtrusively. She glanced down at the caller ID, which flashed in her face, unknown caller. She marvelled how complete strangers trying to sell her funeral cover or home insurance had somehow managed to acquire her number and annoyingly call her over and over again. She would normally not answer the call, but she fancied telling someone to get lost, to let off the steam that was boiling up inside her. "Hello," she said brusquely. "Hello," came a man's voice. "Am I speaking to Miss Freya Frost?" "That's right, you are. It's Freya Frost speaking." "Good. I'm glad to have got you in person, Miss Frost. My name is Connor Sanderson Parker. I'm phoning from Bronson and Barkwell Solicitors concerning the deceased estate of Miss Tina Crosscrow." "Sorry," said Freya. "I think you've got the wrong number. The name rings a bell, but I don't know a Tina Crosscrow. Hold on a moment. Now I remember. I did meet a girl of that name recently. I gave her a lift in a taxi about 2 months back. You're not saying she's dead?" "I'm afraid so. Sorry to be the bearer of such sad, very tragic news." Freya gasped. "She was such a sweet person. How did she die? That is so terrible." "Well, I think it would be much better if you would come to our offices," said the solicitors. "I can explain everything to you when we meet face to face. Some things are not appropriate to discuss over the phone, I'm sure you appreciate." "Look, it's not necessary," said Freya. "I told Tina that she didn't need to pay me back for the taxi fare that night. I told her it wasn't a big deal, and I'm fine by that." "Look, Miss Frost, this is not about an overdue taxi tariff. Nothing of the kind. As I said, it would be in your interest to come into our offices. Would 3 o'clock this afternoon suit you?" "Fine," said Freya, taking down the address and feeling heartily annoyed that she needed to go to Tina's solicitors. What could they possibly want with her? It would be an awful inconvenience when her focus was to find a job, but she would do it for Tina Crosscrow. She had felt a kindred connection with the sad woman. She couldn't believe that she was actually dead. How could this have happened to one so young? She was surprised to find a couple of tears spilling down her cheeks. "Get a grip," she told herself. who didn't even know the girl very well. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Freya arrived promptly at the solicitor's office. The middle-aged grey-haired woman at the reception was wearing a classic Armani suit. She beckoned for Freya to take a seat on a very glamorous-looking L-shaped sofa in the waiting room. Freya suddenly felt rather self-conscious in this upmarket attorney's office because she was wearing a pair of casual jeans. This place did not do jeans. She should have worn something smarter, like her pleated black pantsuit that she wore for her job when she worked in the department store. It was too late for that, she thought with regret, suddenly feeling conspicuously scruffy. She glanced around at the pretentious glossy copies of Town and Country, intermingled with Harper's Bazaar, Vogue, Tatler, Good Housekeeping, and Hello, and many other trendy-looking magazines, spread out liberally across the glass coffee table. She pretended to be busily scanning through her cell phone, when the receptionist looked up at her directly and said, "Mr. Sanderson Parker will see you now, Freya. His office is the second door to the right. Just go through, will you?" she said, peering at Freya through a pair of sophisticated zooty pink glasses and giving her a warm, encouraging smile. Mr. Sanderson Parker was an eccentric-looking man who looked as if he had come off the cover of Town and Country magazine. Although he was clearly American, he looked remarkably English, like one of the men you might encounter visiting Downton Abbey in the post-war era, who had returned home with a pheasant in his hand after a very dignified shoot, wearing a tweed jacket and a pair of traditional English Wellington boots, with a black Labrador running at his side. In truth, he didn't look like he belonged in this generation at all, and his marked eccentricity was very endearing. For a moment Freya thought she was on a movie set, applying for a job at Downton Abbey as a lady's maid, only the jeans just didn't work for the part. If the solicitor thought she looked scruffy and out of place, like a flower growing in the wilderness, he gave nothing away. Mr. Sanderson Parker was wearing a very debonair tweed jacket, a smart white cotton shirt, a silken cravat that was tucked neatly into his collar. The man had a full head of grey curls that tumbled over his face rather messily, and had long old-fashioned sideburns and bushy eyebrows, with stray hairs that desperately needed a trim, and Freya kept longing to pull out her nail scissors to do just that for him, but she bit her lip instead and smiled bashfully at the solicitor. She couldn't imagine what on earth she was doing here, in these luxurious offices. The man was probably in his early 60s. He appeared distinguished and unquestionably upper class, reeking of the kind of old money that comes down from a substantial inheritance. He looked as if he was born with a plum in his mouth, as if his life had been crowned with great privilege. He had likely attended some of the poshest schools and universities in the country when he was a boy. But he was both charming, friendly, and seemingly very kind, almost as if he sympathetically understood that she felt like a fish out of water, swimming among sharks in his office. He stood up from his leather-swiveled chair, very politely, when Freya entered his formal office. He shook her hand vigorously. Freya felt rather embarrassed. Her hands were clammy. His were firm and dry. "Thank you very much for coming, Miss Frost. I do appreciate it very much. Please, will you take a seat?" he said, beckoning to a very formal-looking upholstered wing chair. Freya sat down rather gratefully, clutching her purse tightly to her chest, in a self-soothing gesture, and said rather gingerly, "I don't understand what this is about, Mr. Sanderson Parker." She crinkled her eyebrows. I don't understand what this is about, Mr. Sanderson Parker," said Freya, crinkling her eyebrows. "As I told you, I didn't actually know Tina Crosscrow. I met her outside a bar. She'd been robbed. Some nasty bugger stole her purse, I'm afraid. She was without funds to get a taxi home. I just helped her out. But I never knew her. How did she die? I got an awful shock when you told me the tragic news. She was so young, like myself. She had a whole life ahead of her." "I'm afraid to inform you, Miss Frost, that Miss Tina Crosscrow threw herself off a bridge and lined the dress she was wearing with weights to ensure that she drowned successfully. Her body was recovered on the same day by divers, as a witness saw her jump and reported the event to the police.
I regret to say it was too late to be able to save her."
"But I don't understand," gasped Freya. "It's none of my business, I know, but why would she do that to herself?"
"I don't know the details of her life, Miss Frost. I was just her family solicitor. She came to see me a couple of days before her death, to make some final adjustments to her will, which is why you find yourself here today."
"With the greatest of respect, Mr. Sanderson Parker, what have I got to do with the will of Tina Crosscrow? I told you, I didn't even know her."
"I think this might answer your question, Miss Frost. Tina wrote you a letter that you were to receive as her beneficiary in the event of her death. She was most insistent that I was to personally hand it to you. I said to her that I was likely to go long before she did. She laughed and she said she was sure I was wrong about that, which I thought was a little odd, but I humoured her nevertheless."
"Beneficiary," said Freya, looking nonplussed. "Please, will you read the letter? I'm just having trouble digesting all of this. Are you saying that she's left me something in her will? I'm surprised Tina's got anything to leave. If I was to die now, I'd not have a thing to leave anyone in my family."
"I think I'd better read you the letter," said the solicitor, "and we will see where we go to from here. Maybe Tina's letter will be explanatory. I hope it is," he said with a twinkle in his eyes.
Freya nodded nervously, gulping the air in the office. "Please go ahead." She watched the solicitor open the manila envelope and read a letter written on beautiful paper in the most magnificent curly writing that Freya had ever seen. So there we are. That's the end of part 2 of our story. Part 3 is tomorrow night, and I look forward to you joining me then. Until next time, goodbye. Good night.